BRONXNET. Your voice, your views, your vision.
I'm the president of Bronx Overall Economic Development Corporation, and I want to welcome you to the Bronx's first economic summit. The economic summit was the brainchild of Borough President Ruben Diaz Jr. And when he told me about it, I was like, we're going to do what? When? We're going to get everybody in one room, and I didn't think we would be able to do this. But, thanks to the hard work of my staff at BOEDC, the Borough President staff, who please give everyone a round of applause for my staff and the Borough President staff. I really wish I could take all the credit for doing this, but I really can't, so I'm not going to do it. My staff is tremendous, Medalia, everyone, and without them, this would never happen. I have a housekeeping issue I have to take care of. Now, what we've done is we've color-coded everything. So everyone's tag has a color code depicting what panel session you'll be attending. All right? So if you don't have a color code, we have an issue, but we'll work on that later. So if you have a green sticker, you are poised for growth. And that's the AM, and that's going to be at the Tented Terrace, which is right behind us. It's the other side of where you have breakfast. If you have a red sticker, you are at Retention and Expansion, which is in the lovely Garden Cafe, which is out here on my left. And if you have a yellow sticker, you are cashing in on the green economy, which should be a very fascinating panel session, and that's at the foyer section, which is right behind us. So, if that's clear, we'll go throughout the day. That you'll see that you have morning panel sessions and afternoon panel sessions. After the panel session, there'll be a short break, then luncheon, and our keynote speaker will begin the luncheon festivities. It's always difficult to put these events together, and we need help from a lot of different areas and a lot of different people. And we had sponsors that really stepped up to the table and put this together. And this is very on short notice. I mean, I was calling people at the very last minute and said, please, I need you to help. And one of the organizations and that has always stepped up for the borough of the Bronx, has always stepped up whenever we need is Con Edison. And Con Edison has always been there. When we need them, Con Edison's there. The lights are here, thanks to Con Edison. So what I like to do is bring up Eric Soto from Con Edison. Eric, please say a few words and please welcome Eric Soto.
Good morning, everyone. Con Edison is deeply proud to sponsor the Business Summit today. Our support represents an important partnership with business and government to shape New York City's dynamic energy needs. An important benefit of this type of summit is that it provides a central forum to exchange vital information that helps all of us to successfully operate our businesses. Con Edison services are central to the growth and development of the city's economy, and particularly this borough. The energy landscape is changing very dramatically over the next several years, and all of you are expected to benefit from those changes. We're investing in wind, solar, and smart grid technology to deliver cleaner sources of energy to New York consumers, and we intend to spend $7 billion over the next 3 years to build and replace and upgrade our systems. We want to make sure that the company is ready to serve this borough and the city when the economy inevitably turns around. Thank you all for coming today, and we want to thank the borough president for organizing this unique and long overdue event. Enjoy the day.
Every time I get in front of a mic, I get an urge to tell a joke. I'm not going to do it. I'm just telling you I get these urges to tell jokes, but I'm not going to do that today. The next speaker is actually our host for today. And Gregory Long and I have a relationship dating back to when Gregory was a board member at BOEDC. And actually, he was one of the board members that really kept me on my toes. In other words, calling me, telling me, this is what you have to do. Why aren't we doing this? And he always pushed us in the right direction. I appreciated all the help he's given us. So at this moment, I'd like to bring up our host, Gregory Long, who's the president of the Botanical Gardens.
Thank you very much, Ray. Good morning. It's a beautiful November morning here in the Bronx, isn't it? What a fabulous turnout the borough president and his office have arranged. We want to thank the borough president on behalf of the garden and all the people of the garden very much, not just for this morning, but for all he's doing for us and for the other cultural institutions here, and also his wonderful deputy borough president, Aurelio Green, both of whom are great friends of the garden. Great friends of the garden for many, many years through their fine work in Albany. I think the main point I wanted to make this morning for you in welcome you is that New York City is the cultural capital of the world, and that means all of New York City. That means us here too. That means the Bronx. And you know, we have not just government here and the private sector, but we also have a very fine not-for-profit sector in this borough, very, very big, very fine institutions of higher education of international importance, very fine medical and health establishments, and also really great cultural institutions. There is the great Bronx Zoo, the Wildlife Conservation Society. There is the Bronx Museum of the Arts. There is the Bronx County Historical Society. There's the Bronx, the New York Botanical Garden. There, the Bronx Chamber Orchestra, the Bronx Council on the Arts. These very, very fine, very well-respected organizations in the city and regionally. And we really support we appreciate very much, all of us, the support of the borough president and the business community here in the borough. We employ a lot of people. We bring a lot of tourists into the borough, millions actually now every year. There's a kind of tidal wave of people coming and going and spending money here. There's a big rollout. There's a big economic impact from these institutions. This organization alone, for example, sends home every year in paychecks every 2 weeks to Bronx residents about $30 million a year. So we feel that we are integral parts of the growth and the economic well-being of the community, and that's a role we treasure and that we would like to grow as you grow too here in the borough. We want to thank the borough president especially for his interest in our family gardening programs and the children's gardening programs here. We teach vegetable gardening and good eating and better nutrition to the children of New York City and to their families and teachers. We have a big family garden, which is a huge and historic program, but we're emphasizing it nowadays because it's what the people of the city really need. The children need it. And the borough president kicked off our vegetable gardening season this year by cutting the ribbon in the family garden and also at a wonderful community garden called the Garden of Happiness down in a few blocks away. So the borough president has also shown his support for the cultural institutions by bringing important dignitaries here. He planted a tree, a beautiful tree, with the Secretary of State for Environmental and Natural Resources from the Dominican Republic here a few weeks ago, which was a very nice ceremony. And a lot of you came, a lot of our neighbors came, and that was a great thing. There's a long-standing relationship between environmental research in the Dominican Republic and the New York Botanical Garden. It's one of the many Latin American countries where we've worked for a long time, so we were very, very happy about that event. Now I have a treat for you, which is on these screens. The family garden this summer was the scene for children to learn about good gardening, vegetable gardening, growing vegetables at home, and eating well. And the Today Show came, and so did NBC Nightly News, and they did 5 minutes. They did a 5-minute segment on this program. So we have that for you this morning, and I think whoever's doing that could really roll it.
This morning on Today Goes Green, an innovative program aimed at reducing the country's childhood obesity epidemic. Here's NBC's Chief Environmental Affairs correspondent, Ann Thompson.
It is spectacular beauty in an unexpected place. The New York Botanical Garden, 250 acres of serenity in the city. broken twice a week by the enthusiasm of 120 pint-sized gardeners.
I got 2.
They are part of a unique program teaching kids about growing vegetables organically.
Yo, look at the big one right there.
From seed to plate, aiming to plant in the kids an appreciation for the earth and healthier eating habits. City kids 3 to 12 years old leave their concrete and asphalt worlds for what 11-year-old JC Villalobos calls the freedom to get dirty.
There's this kind of victorious feeling as you pull that vegetable out of the dirt, and you know that you did it, not anybody else.
In the children's garden, work and science are disguised as fun.
Remember the first day we had the most wanted weeds and we put them in jail? Yeah.
10-year-old Eden Stewart loves digging in.
My favorite thing is learn about the plants, what they do, and how they can affect us. And I also like the harvesting because at home we get to cook them and make experiments with them.
6 beans for a bouquet.
Toby Adams runs the organized chaos.
How hard is it to keep their attention?
That's surprisingly not that difficult. We have a 2-acre site with discoveries around every single corner, so the garden takes care of that.
Yielding buried treasures like potatoes and tall grains in the breakfast bowl garden.
This is an opportunity to share with children the plants that they find floating in their cereal bowl.
So we've got corn.
Yeah, we have sweet corn here.
This is?
Barley.
Barley.
In the middle, we have rice.
Rain or shine, in teams of 2, the older kids work 4 by 12-foot plots. The youngest, called Sprouts, start with the basics of gardening.
Great job.
This summer, Eden and Capri Christensen prepared soil, planted seeds, fertilized, watered, and waited to see the results of their work.
So what have you eaten out of this garden?
Well, I love carrots and
Not exactly typical kid fare. The program believes if kids grow it, they'll eat it.
Do vegetables taste better because you grow them yourselves?
Yeah.
It'd have to be.
Well, I think because they're more fresh than the ones you buy in the supermarket.
At a factory, you don't really know if they sprayed some random chemical on it. Here, I know that I did this to it, and it's going to stay like that.
It smells good, right?
Yeah.
Each lesson comes with an opportunity to prepare and taste vegetables in new ways. There's even an Iron Chef competition.
And the secret ingredient today are tomatoes.
They chop, grate, saute, and savor what they've grown. At Farmers Market Day, they sell their wares to each other. The kids take home produce and recipes to share with their families. But there are some vegetables even freshness can't help.
I strongly have a distaste for squash or zucchini.
Well, I'm also not the biggest fan of eggplant.
Victoria Namenworth credits the program for making her a better eater. The alumna is now back as a volunteer to share what she learned.
Everything doesn't come in a prepackaged container. It comes from somewhere, and it can come from their own hands, from sowing the seeds to harvesting.
After all the vegetables have been eaten and the plants withered away, the life lessons remain. Teamwork, an appreciation of nature, and most of all, a sense of accomplishment.
Celebrated by Capri's mom at the dinner table.
Every time I bring home a lot of greenery and stuff, she makes it up a big salad. She gives me a big salad and calls it the Capri salad.
A season in the sun, yielding a recipe for a healthy life and an appreciation for nature's bounty. For today, Ann Thompson, NBC News, the Bronx.
What a great lesson for those kids.
Well, thank you again very much for coming today. It's my pleasure now to introduce our real host here today, the real organizer, our new leader here in the Bronx, the person we're so excited about, Ruben Diaz Jr.
Thank you, Mr. President. What a delightful little piece of news reporting, right? Let that be one to grow on for all of us, with all of our kids here in the borough and throughout the city of New York, who are doing such a great work in remaining healthy and contributing here to the borough of the Bronx with the Botanical Garden. Let's give a strong round of applause to our president here in the Botanical Garden, Gregory Long. I also want to recognize in the crowd we have Council Member-elect, our new City Council member, Fernando Cabrera. We have the Commissioner of Small Business Administration, Mr. Robert Walsh, who's here with us today. Commissioner, thank you. I see Councilwoman Maria del Carmen Arroyo, who just walked in. Thank you. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank all of you for taking the time out of your day to participate in what I feel and what many of you agree is a very important event. In my inaugural speech in May, I focused on the concept of One Bronx, with the idea being that no longer would communities and their leaders be mindful of only the problems in their neighborhoods. One Bronx means we all come together, regardless of location or any other barrier, and work for the good of the whole. So what's good for Riverdale is good for Hunts Point. What's bad for Throsneck should be bad for Highbridge. That is what One Bronx means. With that in mind, I would like to thank the many hardworking business leaders from our business improvement districts, the chambers of commerce and other merchant groups from every corner of the Bronx and everywhere else for offering their time and their expertise. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give all those individuals who helped coordinate. If you could just stand up, those individuals who are in our coordinating committee, please stand up. Please stand up. All of the folks. You could do better than that. Let's clap for them. They did this free of charge. They did it for the last couple of weeks and months, and for that we want to thank you. There may be no issue more important and more deserving of our attention than the economic woes that face our borough today. 3 decades ago, the Bronx was best known for its worst features. Arson was the norm, crime was high, and the middle class was fleeing our borders in droves. During the 1977 World Series, Howard Cosell surveyed the landscapes of our borough and declared on national television, "The Bronx is burning. The Bronx is burning." Do you guys remember that? Things have changed, and we all know that. And thanks to many of you here, we've brought about that change over the last 2 decades. The fires are out, crime has dropped dramatically, and our infrastructure is greatly improved. Lots that were once vacant are filled with new housing, schools, and retail centers, all of which would have seemed unthinkable not so long ago. The Bronx is no longer burning. The Bronx is beautiful, isn't it? But we still have work to do, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm hopeful that this summit will begin to offer a blueprint as we move forward on how we can build on our strengths and focus on our weaknesses and grow the Bronx economy. Our employment rate has remained the highest in New York State for years. And a recent study indicated that no urban county in the United States has a higher poverty rate than we do. These statistics are unfortunate, and we must work to change them. These are issues that we need to address together, and that's why everyone is here today. In advance of this conference, a gentleman by the name of Mario Gonzalez Corso, a professor of economics at Lehman College, my alma mater, put together an economic snapshot of the life in the borough today. I want to thank him for that, as this report clearly outlines many of the issues that face our population. The report shows that poverty rates here in the Bronx, that the poverty rate is 28.3%. Let me say that again. The poverty rate here in the Bronx is 28.3%. That's more than double the state and the federal average. Get a load of this one. According to his report, only 21.6% of Bronxites own their own homes. Only 21%, that's less than a quarter, compared to more than 55% of homeowners in the state of New York and 2/3 of all Americans. The response to this, I believe, has to be better paying jobs. And even before I took, you want to clap for that? No? Even before I took office in May, I have been critical of Mayor Bloomberg and his administration's development agenda. While we are certainly happy to see new job creation and jobs that are created here in the Bronx and elsewhere, for the most part, these jobs have been low-paying and part-time in nature. So even though more Bronxites are working now than in years past, our poverty rate remains the nation's highest. Those numbers just don't add up. These new jobs have not done anything to lift Bronxites out of poverty, and that, ladies and gentlemen, must change, and that's what we're going to start to do here today. That is why I have taken up the fight demanding that new jobs created at the Kingsbridge Armory provide workers a living wage, with critical health benefits, so that hardworking Bronx residents be given the chance to raise themselves out of poverty. When billionaire developers come to our borough and our city and take tens of millions of dollars in taxpayer subsidies to do business, the jobs they create must provide their employees with a chance to make a better life for themselves. And I also believe that the local Bronx businesses should be used at a greater rate than we've seen in the past. This is just part of the economic agenda my administration, in conjunction with the Bronx Overall Economic Development Corporation, will lay out for the next 4 years. My office will do everything that it can to expand a green economy here in the Bronx. Many of you know that as a New York State Assembly member, I authored legislation that gives tax incentives to developers who build their projects in an environmentally friendly manner. And I will expand on that work as the Bronx Borough President. When new green development are constructed here and all over the city of New York, it should be Bronxites that are trained for that construction and Bronx companies that supply the green material. Let me just get into that a little bit. When I was fresh out of high school, I started working at Farberware. I don't know if many of you remember Farberware, but there you made kitchen utensils and pots and pans. And it was off the Bruckner. And when NAFTA was signed, Farberware was moved to South America, Central America. And we lost over 800 jobs, manufacturing jobs. Those jobs were never replaced. And so I hope that part of the conversation as we move forward, when you speak of a green economy and a sustainable economy, is how is it that we can get green materials like solar panels and green roofs and energy-efficient boilers? How is it that we get them manufactured here, not only just used in the development, but manufactured in areas like Hunts Point, Zariga, Bathgate, so that when I go to buildings and we're cutting ribbons and we see solar panels and we see cogeneration, it's a beautiful thing, but when I'm able to ask the question, where were they manufactured and who were the individuals who helped place these here and who helped install them, then the response will be that happened right here in God's country, the Bronx. We need to develop a comprehensive plan to address the needs of our business districts. Issues like parking and the lack thereof, predatory ticketing, dirty streets, vandalism, graffiti, higher taxes, increased fines and penalties. These are common themes for all Bronx merchants, regardless of where you are located. And that needs to be discussed at this summit. We need to bring more private sector jobs to our boroughs, from retail to professional sector and everywhere in between. We need to make sure that our business districts have the transit services they need. And yes, we need to bring a real hotel to the borough of the Bronx. I want developers to do business in the Bronx, but they must do business in the right way. That is why I will continue to call for better jobs, sustainable development, and an expanded green economy. Even though we've only been in office for a short amount of time, I'm already thinking about our legacy and what we will leave behind for future generations of Bronxites. That is why we must plan for the future beginning today. We must strive to no longer be a leader in unemployment and poverty. Starting today, we will plan for a Bronx with fewer vacant storefronts and a thriving small business community. Starting today, we will plan for an even stronger infrastructure in the Bronx, with greater transportation options and a connectivity between business districts. Starting today, we will prepare to be a national leader in the growing green economy. I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out. We didn't know if we were going to get the type of turnout, but the fact that you are all here today shows us, and you show each other, that there's so many different people who have so much invested in this borough, that we will not, just like we did it in the 70s and the 80s, allow for failure to take us over. Starting today, I think that it's important that we lay out a blueprint so that we can continue to have this conversation. You know, quite often when I go around, I think that I have an innovative idea, and as I visit the borough of the Bronx and visit different businesses and visited many of your locations, I realized everything that I thought that I was being smart about was already happening. And quite often, the problem that we have is not that we don't have good stuff happening in the borough, it's just that sometimes the left hand just doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So please use the rest of today to exchange ideas, to let people know what you're doing, network, ask questions, and also what you think are responses and solutions to some of the concerns that you may hear today. I think we're going to have a fantastic summit. Enjoy. Thank you all for coming out. I want to thank the Bronx Overall Economic Development Corporation and all of the staff members. I want to thank my Deputy Borough President for helping to plan this, Aurelia Green. Thank you. And I want to thank each and every single one of my staff members who I've driven absolutely crazy over the last couple of weeks. Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your day. I know that there have been many different ideas and conversations that are taking place today, and not just today, but here in the Bronx and throughout the city of New York and the state of New York, with regards to how is it that we deal with the economic crisis in the United States and locally. A good friend of mine, Congressman Steve Israel from Long Island, he's been working at the federal government, with the federal government, and much has been said about stimulus funding, and much has been said about a new green sustainable economy. I want to concentrate on that a little bit. The federal government passed for the Department of Energy alone, just on green jobs and green economy and to stimulate a sustainable, environmentally friendly economy in the United States. The federal government passed $90 billion in stimulus funds, and it assigned it to the Department of Energy. $90 billion. $45 billion of that were distributed in the states throughout all the 50 states. The Department of Energy, believe it or not, right now currently still has half of that, $45 billion of federal funding, of stimulus funding, that they are looking to see what is it they're going to do with it and where they're going to give it out. And just to put it in perspective, the annual budget for the Department of Energy is $12 billion. So $45 billion on top of that, believe it or not, they still don't even know what to do with it. They don't have guidelines. And in the state of New York, Steve Israel, myself, Mayor Drexel from Syracuse, we've comprised what's called the New York State Partnership for Energy. And what we want to do is be part of the conversation, part of the dialogue as to what are the guidelines, what should be the guidelines for the distribution of those stimulus dollars. To that end, part of that conversation has to be how green buildings, how we get green buildings and how we fund those. And today we really, really have a treat as our keynote speaker because this individual, Edward Masra, has been a leader in not only the green economy, but with green buildings. Edward Masra is the founder and executive director of Architecture 2030. And he is an internationally recognized architect who reshaped the national and international dialogue on energy and climate change by bringing the building sector, which is the largest energy consumer and contributor to global warming, to the center stage. Masra's research showed conclusively that buildings are responsible for almost half of all U.S. energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions, and that any viable solution to global warming must run through the building sector. As an award-winning architect with over 35 years of experience in low energy and passive solar energy design, and the author of numerous published works, including the Passive Solar Energy book, which is currently in use worldwide, Masra is preeminently qualified to develop a method for transforming the building sector from the greatest contributor to climate change to its leading solution. Based on his experience and research, Masra developed and issued the widely adopted 2030 Challenge, a measure and an achievable strategy to dramatically reduce global GHG emissions and fossil fuel consumption by the year 2030. He's impressive. He has the vision. He has a plan that I think that here in the Bronx we should look to in the long run and adopt. But more importantly for me, not more importantly, but one of the things that I was impressed about is not only that has he been the leader in this area, but he was also drafted in 1962 by the New York Knicks. And he got a chance to play at the Rutgers basketball tournament in Harlem, which I always wish that I could do. I'm not that good of a basketball player. Ladies and gentlemen, he's traveled halfway across the country to be with us here this afternoon. Please help me welcome our keynote speaker, Mr. Edward Masra.
Thank you, Ruben. It's great to be back in New York. My daughter's here. She's grew up in New Mexico. I left New York about 30 years ago, and she was born in New Mexico, but came full circle, is now living in Brooklyn, so go figure that. I want to play a short clip for you. This was at Harry Reid's summit that happened not too long ago, and it's actually of Bill Clinton, so it's a very, very short 2.5 minute little video.
Thank you very much. This topic, jobs and a green economy, is, I believe, at the core of how good the bill we get is, how good the Copenhagen Agreement will be, and how much we are going to do. But I think it is worth remembering that the least sexy topic is where the most jobs are. The American Council for Energy Efficiency says that efficiency investments can provide up to half of the greenhouse gas reductions we need by 2050, lead to substantial net savings for consumers and businesses on the order of $2 trillion by 2050. I say all this because while something has been done in a country that just lost 7 million jobs, we're still just playing with this. On balance, every $1 billion we invest in a coal-fired power plant creates 870 jobs. In photovoltaic cells, 1,800 jobs. In solar thermal plants, 1,900 jobs. In wind energy, 3,300 jobs. Every $1 billion spent on building retrofits is 6,000 jobs. I was very grateful for the $18 billion in stimulus money that went to these projects. But we are still piddling with this. We have to figure out how to do this on a national scale and show how it can be done on an international scale. Our foundation was asked to help a group called the C40, 40 big cities on 6 continents, work on building retrofits. Some of them have been wonderful, but ironically, the most comprehensive efforts have been made in the cities that were already the most efficient. The cities that could be making the biggest gain at the lowest investment with the largest numbers of jobs still have a very difficult time focusing on this as compared with what they might do in electric trains or electric cars or solar or wind or tidal energy. So what I would like to ask all of you to do is to think about what we can do to really seriously take this to scale and in the process get rid of the terrible job losses we have sustained in this recession. If we want a good bill, we have to convince people that this is an economic winner. If we want China and India in any form or fashion to participate in this, even if they commit to specific actions, not specific targets, whatever the deal finally winds up being, we've got to convince people that this is good economics.
It's always fun to follow Bill Clinton. So I changed the title of the talk for today to Jobs, Jobs, and More Jobs. Jobs are becoming critical. Everybody's talking about it. The Congress wants to pass a jobs bill now before Congress comes home for the holidays, so we don't get the kind of crazy town hall meetings we had before. So this is now becoming a really critical issue. What I'm going to try to do today is set the national stage for you, what the issues are with the economy, with jobs, and then add in climate change and energy, and try to give you basically a full plate on where I think we need to be headed and where the shortfalls are and the pitfalls. This is U.S. unemployment going back to 2004. I'm going to put this in motion. We hit 2007, and this is where we are today. At 10.2% is our unemployment rate. But more importantly, construction unemployment is at 20%. There are over 1.6, these are just since the recession, so this number is going to be larger. There are 1.6 million construction workers right now out of a job. In October, this last month, we lost 190,000 jobs. When you dig into that and look at the numbers, 62,000 of that 190,000 jobs were construction workers. The roofers, the plumbers, the framers. And if you look at a construction job, it's tied to 2 other jobs. There's the construction job is the direct job, then there's the indirect job. The people who manufacture carpet, the people who manufacture windows and glazing and paint and you name it, those are tied to that one job. And then you have additional jobs that are tied to those 2 jobs, and that's the guy flipping burgers at McDonald's and the restaurants and all the other retail outlets. So every one construction job that's lost is really 3 jobs. So when you see that number 62,000 and you multiply it by 3, basically all the jobs lost last month was tied to the building sector. So what's going on? Well, at the beginning of the year, we put in place a stimulus, $787 billion. Ruben was just talking about that. Where did the money go and what kind of jobs did we get? The feds estimated that we got 640,000 plus jobs out of the stimulus we've spent already. If you've been looking at the headlines, that's being debated now. People are saying it's much less because all sorts of people reporting jobs. There really were no jobs there. But let's just assume that the 640,000 was a good number. The other number that they gave out was that they created 80,000 construction jobs. Out of all the jobs, that's not even a month's worth of job losses. That's the total stimulus spent so far to date has created or saved, probably not created any new construction jobs, but saved about 80,000 jobs. Why is that all important? This is the total building sector in the U.S. This is where all the square footage is. 7% is in public buildings. That's schools, other educational facilities, city hall, community centers, any public building. Total square footage in the U.S. is 7%. Then you have the private sector, which is 93%. It's divided between the housing sector and the commercial sector, and the housing sector is by far most of the square footage in the U.S., probably 2/3 to almost 3/4 of our total building stock is housing. Housing is down 75% from 2006 till today. There's virtually no construction going on in the country in housing. So what does this look like, and how does this all work? Well, the private building sector provides a lot of the tax base for public buildings and infrastructure. So you get property taxes and construction people who are working, they pay taxes, and that provides the tax base for fixing City Hall, for building roads, for working on the Botanic Garden here, for all those things that we do. The private sector is shrinking, or it's almost non-existent now, so the tax base is shrinking also. And I just saw on a taxi cab ride last night that Bloomberg is looking to cut, I can't remember what percentage of the city budget to try to bring it within balance. So cities are hurting, counties are hurting, and states are hurting. So what did the feds do? What they did is they put stimulus money into the public building sector and public infrastructure sector, what we call shovel-ready projects. Everything from roads and bridges to changing out light bulbs at City Hall and maybe fixing up some of the buildings here. All good and all needed. But they also allocated $1.2 trillion to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and some of the other GSEs to buy up mortgage-backed securities, to bring down the interest rate. Because nobody else is lending. The banks aren't lending. And so the banks will give out a loan, but then they sell it. They sell the loan over to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They've driven the interest rate down to 5%, thinking that if they do that, then people will go out and borrow money and build again. What's happened, however, is the private building sector is shrinking even more. Why? Because people are refinancing at the 5% and not building. Usually when you refi, you add the bedroom, you keep your monthly payment the same, you borrow more money, and you do all sorts of construction. That's when the economy is okay. In this economy, everyone's pocketing the difference on a monthly basis. They're refining, getting a lower monthly rate, taking that money and banking it. So the private sector is shrinking even more. And what happens, what people don't understand is that when the private building sector tanks, it takes the entire economy with it. Everything is tied to the private building sector, from fabrics to carpeting to paint to chemicals to caulking to glass to transportation, trucking, warehousing, you name it, wood, steel, metals, you name it, it's tied to the building sector. So if the building sector goes down, the entire economy falls in with it. So let's take a look at what's happening in the housing sector, which is the largest sector. This is how many jobs we've lost since 2006 in housing construction sector. These are the carpenters and the plumbers and all these guys. Almost 1 million of those 1.6 million jobs, 934,000 jobs. This is the number of jobs we've either saved or created in the housing sector since the recession, since we implemented the stimulus. 15,000 jobs. And those jobs are those folks doing weatherization and low-income housing. That's it. That's where those 15,000 basically saved. I would think there'd be saved jobs. So what's going on here? And what's the problem? Well, what happens when the federal government puts money just into public infrastructure projects? Not that they shouldn't. We're not saying that. But we're saying is that that's all they've done. So what happens when they do that? Let's take 30 billion. There's about 45 billion that they have available. They've spent about half of that. A portion of that is going to be administrative expenses. So let's just take 30 billion and see what happens if we put it into public infrastructure projects. You take the 30 billion, you get $30 billion worth of construction, because what you're doing is just substituting for the tax base. So you're giving the city money, you're giving the county money, you're giving the state's money to distribute, and they're building roads, and they're changing out light bulbs, and they're restuccoing buildings, and they're fixing the brickwork, and that money is used as a substitute for the tax base. So you get 30 billion of construction. How many jobs does 30 billion in construction get you? It gets you 230,000 direct jobs. Those are construction jobs. It then gets you 150,000 indirect jobs. That's the glass manufacturers, the carpet guys, and all that kind of stuff. And then it gets you another 120,000, the guys flipping burgers, the restaurants, and all the retail and all the other jobs. So it gets you 230,000 jobs. Ruben said they spent about half the money, roughly, a little more or less, and they have half to go in the public infrastructure. I would say they probably spent about a third is out the door and actually used. That's, if you take that 230 number, that's where the 80,000 jobs are, okay? This is what Clinton said. In a country, this was months ago, we were at 7 million. We're now at 8.2 million from the unemployment rate with 7 or 8 million people looking for work in this country, really unemployed. To create 230,000 one-time jobs, once that job is over, it's not a renewable job. The reason is that of that 30 billion, 2 billion comes back to the state and local governments in taxes, split about evenly, about $1 billion to the states. This is all the states in the U.S. share that billion in taxes coming back. About another $1 billion to counties and local governments and boroughs and cities and towns. Not at 6%, 6.6% comes back in taxes. Does not build up the tax base. The federal government goes into deficit spending because it only gets $6 billion back. It's spending 30, it gets $6 billion back in taxes. So it's not a renewable program. So what Clinton was talking about and what a lot of folks are talking about is that we have to loosen up money so that we can lend out money so that we can get construction going, because we have 130 million households in the U.S. and they all need renovation at some point or another. And if we can get on with that, we can create millions of jobs. In the idea that's floating around is this revolving loan fund. In New York State, I think the legislature passed $100 million, I think it was, and they're looking for private investment to give out about $1 billion a year, lend out $1 billion a year for renovation, efficiency renovation. But they're lending it out at 3.5% above T-bills, which I think is about 6%. So you could go get a loan up to $13,000 to renovate your building, but you have to pay that money back at 6%. But the money's available. That's called the Green Jobs, Green New York. Let's just take a look at that. We won't take a look at New York. We're just going to take a look at general, and then I'll bring it back to New York. There are a lot of there's a Berkeley model. There's all sorts of these revolving loans where they tie the payback to your lower monthly energy bill or your property taxes, so that if you sell your building or you leave, the next person pays the loan back. So let's take a look at, if you borrowed $13,000 at 6%, And let's say with that $13,000, you can drive efficiency in your home by 50%. You can cut your bill in half. Just say, take an example. So your monthly energy cost, let's say you have a little 1,800 square foot, 2,000 square foot house, $2,000. Now you've cut your bill in half. Now you're only paying $100 a month for your electricity, gas, but you have to pay your loan back. So the bill says you can keep 20% of the savings, but 80% of your savings will be attached to your bill, go to the back into the revolving loan fund. So now you get to save $20 a month, and you've done this renovation, and you borrowed the money. The payback on that is 21 years. New York wants a 10-year payback, so basically you got to get roughly a 50% reduction at $6,500 loan, which is going to be really tough. But let's say you can even do that. So you're saving $20 a month, and you're going through a renovation. I think what folks don't understand is that people get divorced over renovations. If you've ever gone through a renovation, the sheetrockers come in, there's dust everywhere, you got to move the pets out, you got to move out for a few weeks. Who is going to do a renovation? They pop the windows out, it's freezing, it's the middle of winter, you're gone. Who's going to do a renovation for $20 a month? It's not going to happen. There's no millions of jobs here. That is not the solution. It's okay in a good economy because people have income and they want to borrow and all that kind of stuff. So setting up these programs is okay, but it's not going to get us the 7, 8 million, 17 million jobs back that we need. So now what? So what are folks talking about? What's going on in the country? This is what we hear. The president just signed the Workers and Homeowners and Business Assistance Act of 2009. It extended unemployment benefits. It extended the first-time homebuyers tax credit, $8,000. But what it did is it let businesses go back 5 years with their losses and get back taxes on that. And what it did is it gave the builders and developers, the big guys, a windfall. And this is what it did. This is Pulte Homes and 2 other homeowners. There's a whole list of these. Came out in the New York Times. Got a gift. Pulte Homes has in cash or cash reserves in the bank about $1.5 billion. They're not using it to build anything. The feds just gave them another $500 million, $450 million, because now they can go back and take losses back, and that's calculated out. For Pulte, that's what they're getting. And you take the other ones, $275 million, $80 million, $50 million, $25 million, the whole list in the Times. And then the Times went and asked all these builders, are you going to build homes now? You're getting $500 million. How many homes are you going to build? And they said, well, we're probably not going to build any. We're going to wait till the recession's over, till there's demand, and people have money and we have jobs, before we're going to build homes. This was supposed to give them money to build the homes, to create the jobs, and they're banking the money or buying more land for when the boom happens again. No jobs. 0 jobs. So you have Congressman, this was Schumer the other day, looking for anything where we're not getting jobs. This is an infrastructure project. A big wind farm in Texas. Where do the windmills come from? China. They're going to give out $500 million, $450 million to this project. We're going to create 2,000 jobs in China and 300 jobs in the U.S. with that money. So Schumer is threatening legislation to stop that project. He at least has the right mindset. And this just came out yesterday, or yeah, I guess it was yesterday. No, this was before. The next one's yesterday. But this is the Daily News. This is an economist at NYU who said we need another stimulus. And where are we going to put the money in that stimulus? Into shovel-ready infrastructure projects and tax credits for businesses if they hire somebody. We'll give them a tax credit if they hire a new employee. But there's no work. So very little of that money will be used. And now, just yesterday, Congress now, the House, which passed the climate bill and passed the health care bill, now has nothing to do, and they don't want to see all the Democrats go home to face the town hall meeting, so they want a jobs bill before the recess. So it looks like we're doing something. So what are the ideas floating around? Again, small business tax breaks, which I think we need, health benefits, Medicaid, roads and public works. Sounds like the first package. Where are the jobs? So, what I'm here to do is to present what we think is a viable, real jobs program. And we call it the 4.5 million jobs program to bring back the private building sector so it can fund the infrastructure projects on a renewable basis. So these are not just one-time dollars going in. So what is this magic plan? So what happens when federal dollars are put into what we call the 4.5 million jobs investment plan? Let's take 30 billion. So I'm going to run some big numbers here for you. You'll like the numbers, but now you're going to want to know what's behind it, and I'll get to that too. So here's 30 billion. What we want to do is leverage that 30 billion into 280 billion with private spending. So you can't get $1 unless you spend 10. The feds are going to give you $1, average $10. Now, with 280 billion in spending, we get 4.5 million jobs, 1.5 million direct construction jobs. We get our construction crews back. Before we lose the skills, the longer these guys are out of work, they're looking for other jobs. They get another job, they're plumbers. These are our skilled workforce. We need to get them back as soon as possible so we don't lose those skills. What happens if we spend 280 billion, if the feds put in 30 to get 280, 20 billion goes back to state and local governments. So now you're building up the tax base, and the feds get over 2 times its money back in federal taxes. Sounds too good to be true. Well, how does the plan work? What we're calling for is the feds to lower home mortgage interest rates, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, to offer lower interest rates if a homeowner meets an energy reduction target and spends a minimum amount of money doing that, double, and if it's a new building, 20 times the amount of the mortgage buy down. So, and we say that the feds are that 30 billion. This is a small amount of money for 4.5 million jobs. We say that they should use about 75% of it for renovating buildings and the other 25% for new construction, because we still have a little bit of glut in the housing market. We want to get those houses off and get people in them. So this is how the plan works. We say we'll provide a mortgage rate that's 1% below on the left-hand side, below the prevailing rate, which is about 5% now, all the way to 2.5% down below the prevailing rate if you, on the right-hand side, meet an energy reduction target, which is about 30% below code, then 50% below code, then 75% below code, and we'll give you a 2.5% reduction below existing mortgage rates if you get to net zero energy. That means your building produces as much energy as it uses. We're going to make it really lucrative. So let's run through an example. Let's say you have and for new buildings, we give a little bit less, 0.5% less, but we still give you good rates. So let's take 3%. You'd have to get 75% below code. You'd need to have a 75% reduction in your building's energy consumption. So I'm going to run through that. 3%, let's say you want to borrow $250,000. In order to get the 3% rate, you have to spend a minimum of $40,000 renovating your building to get 75% energy reduction. If it costs you 45, it costs you 45. Whatever it costs you, you got to do. Now, to get that rate, we say if you want to add on the bedroom and even up your mortgage rate, we'll still give you the 3%. The more construction you do, the better. So what does that look like? I'm going to take a building that's not underwater. This program is not for buildings underwater. It's for people who refied, who refied, within probably the last 5 or 10 years. So let's say you have a $240,000 mortgage at 6%, and you only have equity of about $30,000 in. So you owe about $210,000. You're paying about $1,439 a month. To get 75% below code or an energy reduction, 75%, you have to invest a minimum of $40,000. Nobody in his right mind today, for $150 a month less energy bill, is going to go shell out 40 grand and borrow that money. But what we say is we'll give you a 3% mortgage, and you can keep the solar tax credit on top of it to pay down points or whatever you want to do, fees. We'll give you the 3% mortgage. Now, without taking a penny out of your pocket, you owe $210,000. You want to add in the $40,000. You go take a mortgage for $250,000, guaranteed by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They'll buy it as long as you meet the requirements. So you borrow $250,000 now. At 3%, your monthly payment is $1,000, a little over $1,000, $1,050. So if you take advantage of that, now your monthly savings is $385. Your energy savings is $158. You're saving $543 a month. You haven't taken a penny out of your pocket. The government has given you the lower interest loan. They have to package that with some dollars to sell it on the open market. But now you put people back to work. And if you offer the lower rate for people doing new construction, developers, they can take someone to the bank and get them a 3%, 3.5%, 4%, 4.5% loan if he meets the energy reduction targets. Now he's got more customers. Now Pulte is willing to build and let loose with some of those billions they've stashed in the bank. What happens if you had a 5.5% loan or a 5% loan? The numbers still work out. Even if you refied at 5%, at that amount, you still would make almost $400 a month. Now you have disposable income. So what are the benefits for the plan? Well, you put the building sector back to work. You keep people in their homes because they have lower monthly mortgage rates and payments. You've lowered their monthly energy bills. You've increased their disposable income now. You brought the federal and local tax base back. But even more importantly, we've helped the nation lower its energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions. Let me tell you why this is critical. This is what scientists are saying. I'm not talking about the far left or the far right. They all interpret the science for their own whatever agenda they have. It's political, economic, whatever agenda they have. Democrats trying to drag down the Republicans, Republicans trying to drag down the Democrats, whatever agenda they have. We want to know, what is our scientific community, the ones we entrust to do the science, all of them, National Academy of Sciences, NASA, NOAA, what are they telling us? They're all telling us exactly the same thing, that we have a huge problem on our hands, that we're off the charts. This is CO2 in red and global average temperature in blue going back 450,000 years. You can see this going back 3 million years. Be the same. CO2 sits right on top, parts per million in the atmosphere, sits right on top of global average temperature. It's a greenhouse gas. When you have lots of greenhouse gas, the temperature of the Earth goes up. When you don't have, temperature of the Earth goes down. The oceans regulate, all sorts of things going on. We haven't been over 300 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere for 450,000 years, probably for the last 3 million years. Today we're at 387 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere. we have raised global average temperature to about 0.7 of a degree centigrade, what we call global warming. And there's CO2 that's up there because the Earth takes a long time to respond, that built into the system is 1.3 degrees centigrade global warming. That's built in if we stop burning fossil fuels tomorrow. This is global average temperature going back to 1880. I just want to show you something. You see the temperature going up. You've heard now, probably, you don't hear so much of it today, but you heard over the last year that the planet's cooling. What happened was, in 1998, we had an El Nino event. Whenever we have an El Nino event, there's spikes. Temperature of the planet goes up. Then you go into La Nina, and has to do with currents and ocean temperatures. So we had an El Nino event in 1998, so we had a big spike. In 2008, that's where the temperature was. So everyone was screaming, last 10 years, 1998 to 2008, we're cooling. Well, look where 2009 is. We're going up now for a record year, and probably next year, the El Nino just started, we're going to have another record year. So you just can't take a few years. The trend is always up. So now the cooling argument has died down, and people are onto some other argument. But what's the problem? Now, you can believe anything you want. This thing is a matter of risk. Are you willing to take the risk? This is the risk that our scientific community is telling us we will take if we keep pumping CO2 into the atmosphere, whether you believe them or not. Just a risk. They're saying that by 2050, 25% of all plant and animal species on Earth will be gone. By 2100, business as usual, that number will be 50%. 50% of all plant and animal species on Earth gone. This is from NASA. NOAA says we will bleach our coral reefs by 2050, home to 25% of all marine species. The West, we're expected to dry out in New Mexico, Arizona, huge water issues for us, and forest fire issues as we dry out. Quadruple the acreage burned by 2050. Weather extremes expected to increase because warmer air holds more moisture, so when it rains harder, and you get flooding. Hurricanes, hurricane intensity and water content expected to increase, not frequency. Greenland is melting. We now know that Antarctica is warming. We now know we're into sea level rise. We've done the largest sea level rise study in the U.S. It's now used by the National Academy of Sciences and NOAA. We didn't look at Al Gore's. Everybody's arguing Al Gore said 6 meters. He's crazy. We looked at a meter. To be coming up in a matter of decades, they're projecting slightly over a meter by 2100. What does a meter do to the United States? That's a beautiful city, Charleston, South Carolina. That's just a meter, a little over a meter, meter and a half. That city would be devastated. Hollywood, Florida, that's 1 meter of sea level rise. It'd be gone. Miami Beach, South Beach, gone at a meter of sea level rise. Over to the West Coast, Silicon Valley, Foster City, that's a meter of sea level rise. You can go on our website, architecture2030.org. We've done everything from New Jersey, Maine, all the way down the coast, the Carolinas, all the way around. Hundreds of cities and towns would be inundated. If we get the meter and a half, 2 meters of sea level rise, it would be an economic disaster for the United States. So what are the scientists saying? Limit climate change to 2 degrees centigrade. Don't forget, we have 1.3 built in. They want to keep it under 2. Obama went to the G8 recently, and all the G8, the industrialized countries, said, we pledge to keep global warming under 2 degrees centigrade. That means we have to reduce our emissions 83% below 2005 levels by the year 2050. So we need to get started right away. Climate change is an energy problem, and this is where the building sector comes in, and this is where the stimulus comes in, and green jobs and all the buildings that we're talking about. It's the building sector that's driving the train. This is energy consumption going back to 1950. In blue is where the building sector is. In yellow is the transportation sector. In red is the industrial sector. And this is the government's projections. And you can see the gap widening. As we build more buildings, we need more energy for buildings. So the House passed a climate change bill. And it's now in the Senate. It's called H.R. 2454. The most important section in this bill deals with buildings. It's section 201. And Energy and Natural Resources passed a bill, also section 241, which is similar. What it says is, by 2010, all buildings built in the U.S., this is a National Energy Conservation Code standard, should be 30% below our latest energy codes. Then they say in 2014, 2015, we should ratchet that up or down 50%, meet a 50% reduction target, and then every 3 years after that, another 5% reduction. And the Senate bill is similar. Why is that so important? Because if we use the stimulus to create the jobs, to get at the buildings, we also get at climate change and at energy consumption. This is the building sector. This is energy consumption in 2005. It's about the same today. About 50, that number 50 is quads of energy, quadrillion BTUs. You just have to know the number 50. You have to know that the U.S. total today, we use 100 quads. So the building sector uses 50 of those quads. These are the projections from our federal government for 2030 and 2050. Now, you've all heard in Congress, Lamar Alexander wants to scrap any kind of climate bill and everything. He wants to build 100 new nuclear plants, fast track them, the big ones, 1,000 megawatt plants. These are the big guys. They cost, what do they cost? $7 billion, $6 billion each? I can't remember. 100 between now and 2030. 100 new 1,000 megawatt nuclear plants. Wants the public to insure them, your tax dollars, fast track them, and give them incentives. So what would 100, and scrap everything else, what would 100 new nuclear plants do to energy consumption in the U.S.? Well, it doesn't reduce our energy consumption. What it does is it offsets some of the energy we need with nuclear energy. This is how much energy 100 nuclear plants would produce. You see the dashed line? Above the dashed line is the actual energy we would use, electricity we would use. Below the dashed line is wasted heat at the power plant and lost through transmission lines. That's the 100 nuclear plants at about $700 to $800 billion worth of construction for those plants. Very few jobs, by the way. This is where we are in 2005. This is what happens if we implement the building codes. And I talked to Ruben and some other folks about actually giving people incentives in the Bronx to implement better efficiency, give them tax incentives, put them to the front of the line, all sorts of things. This is the reduction in energy consumption just through efficiency between now and 2030. That's between now and 2050, just by implementing the House bill, the building codes in the House bill. We actually get huge reductions as opposed to, and we get the jobs, as opposed to 100 new nuclear plants. Now, this is greenhouse gas emissions. That's where we are today. That's what they're projecting for 2030. That's what they're projecting for 2050, business as usual. So let's take where we are today. That's where Obama says we need to be, and that's where the scientists say we need to be in terms of emissions reductions. 83% below 2005 levels. Looks like an impossible task. This is what happens if you implement those building codes that were passed in the House. That's where you are at 2030. That's where you are at 2050. That's the reduction you would get just in the building sector, providing green jobs to renovate our buildings. What Clinton was talking about is the great mass of buildings out there where all the jobs are. That's the reduction you get in greenhouse gas emissions with 100 new nuclear plants. That amount would be need to made up with solar and wind and all the other stuff. That's doable in this country. The rest, you can use fossil fuels. So this becomes a reasonable scenario, but only if we attack the building sector and we use any stimulus money. They don't want to call it a stimulus. Any jobs, the new term now is a jobs bill. Can't call it a stimulus bill, otherwise we get beat up. That's where the money has to go in a new jobs bill. So, what can you do? I can go on and I'll talk to Ruben in the coming weeks about what I think the Bronx can do. But the best thing you can do for this country is to lobby for that 4.5 million jobs plan and get that money into the private building sector. You need some of it in the public building sector, but if you don't turn that private building sector around, those public dollars, they're going to be one-time jobs and you won't have the tax base coming back. So, log on to www.architecture2030.org, and thanks for inviting me back to my home state and city, New York City. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give it up for Mr. Masria, who gave us some food for thought here today. I think that could have been a session in and of itself. With I'm sure that it has provoked a lot of thoughts here. What I want to do before we break out into the evening session is to present you with our Bronx Afghan here.
Biodegradable, energy efficient.
This is provided by the Bronx Historical Society.
Only in New York do you get this kind of thing. Other places you get a handshake.